We're reading from Genesis 7, 1 through 10. And then fast forward a little, we're going to read Genesis 8, 8 through 17 from the Inclusive Bible. Yahweh said to Noah, "Come aboard the ark, you and your household. You alone among this whole generation do I see as righteous. Of all the bright animals, you must take 7 pairs of each kind, a male and a female. Of the unclean animals, you must take 1 pair, a female and a male. Of the clean birds of heaven, also 7 pairs of each kind, a male, a female, and a male, to propagate their kind over the earth. For in 7 days' time, I will bring rain to the earth. It will rain for 40 days and 40 nights, and I will rid the earth of every living thing I have made." Noah did everything that Yahweh commanded. Noah was 600 years old when the flood waters came over the earth. So Noah and his wife, together with their sons and spouses, entered the ark to escape the flood waters. With them came the clean and the unclean animals, the birds and creatures that moved on the ground. 2 by 2 came to Noah into the ark, male and female, as God had commanded. And 7 days later, the water of the flood appeared on the earth. And then Noah sent out the dove to see if the waters had subsided on the earth. And the dove, finding nowhere to perch, returned to the ark, for there was still water over the whole earth. Putting out his hand for the dove, he brought it back into the ark. Noah waited 7 more days and again sent the dove out from the ark. And in the evening, the dove returned with a freshly plucked olive branch in its beak. And Noah knew that the waters were receding from the earth. And after 7 more days, he sent out the dove. And this time, it did not return. In Noah's 601st year, on the day of the 1st month, the waters had dried up on the earth. Noah opened the door on the side of the ark and saw that the ground was drying. And by the 27th day of the 2nd month, the earth was dry. And God said to Noah, "Leave the ark with your wife and your children and their spouses. Bring out all the living things with you, the birds, the animals, and all the slithering things of earth, so they may spread throughout the earth, bear fruit, and become many on the earth."
So something struck me as Mary Beth, not literally, when Mary Beth was reading, in that I know I couldn't build an ark now that I'm in my 70s, but if I were 600 years old, I don't know. Okay. Anyway, Noah and the ark. And everybody knows this story, right? You've all heard this story before. But I am sure that we really don't know it well. And with that in mind, after reading the story in Genesis and getting hung up on how old Noah is, I did some other research by going to Amazon.com, which is where one goes, right? Remember, mega online bookseller, that's how they started that, but I know you can get anything you want there now, including haggis. If you're looking for haggis, you can get it at Amazon. I typed in a search for Noah's Ark, and it brought up thousands, really, I'm not exaggerating, thousands of listings. So undaunted, I started to scroll through them, well, at least the first 2 pages. And most of those were cutesy books for preschoolers with beautifully illustrated, bright colors, but the ark is quite tiny. So that, maybe when you're 600 years old, that's as big as you can make it. But anyway, but there were some other very interesting titles. Noah's Ark, a feasibility study. Right? So, I mean, all kinds of things. So it's like, will it float? What is a cubit? Does anybody know? Anyway, so feasibility study. Noah's Ark, the Sumerian myth. Now that one I might read, actually, because that would be very interesting. And of course, Noah's Ark themed baby showers. Noah's Ark origami. That could be good too. And for naughty ladies, Noah's Ark sewing, quilting, and applique. And for those of you who do know that Joan of Arc was not Noah's wife, and we don't actually know her name because the Bible doesn't tell us, I discovered this title, Nama, Noah's wife. Now that might be interesting to read as well. But those brightly illustrated books for preschoolers are really what are abundant. And they, of course, all omit the difficult main points of the story, because honestly, much of the story should be rated X for violence. And you remember how it starts, because Mary Beth just read this for us. God becomes disappointed, very disappointed. There we go. God becomes disappointed, very disappointed with humankind, especially for the violence and exclusion and self-righteousness. I could go on, as can you, especially after Friday. And God tells Noah, who is the only good guy that there is, to build an ark, a great, big, huge, enormous boat. Think about the biggest cruise ship you can imagine, right? You know, with the stories and everything. And then, you know, triple it, at least. Big enough for his immediate family and for all those animals. 2 of everyone, and 7 pairs of others, and just a whole bunch of animals. And just the thought of just the logistics. So that's part of the feasibility study, I think. So it's got to be big enough for the immediate family. And this is an impossible, enormous task, and Noah does it. Which is a very good thing, at least for Noah and his family and those specially chosen animals. Because what happens next is that it rains and it rains for 40 days and 40 nights, kind of like it did here this spring. And everybody and everything not on the ark drowns. So this is the part of the story that does not make good bedtime reading for little ones. You know, especially when we are having torrential rain ourselves. And so after those 40 days and 40 nights of rain, everything is washed away, submerged. There's absolutely no land in sight. So that's pretty deep water. Right? And then as the water maybe begins to recede, Noah sends up Dove, who eventually comes back with the olive branch in her beak. Do you recognize that symbol of the dove with the olive branch? And that's when Noah knows that the land is emerging again and life can start anew. So we've got the basics of the story, or at least the part of the story that we're most familiar with. But what happens next, I think, actually reveals that there's a lot more going on in this story. So let me go back to the children's book. So, you know, this is me. You're going to have to follow with me because I'm taking a little side tour here. I purchased a few children's books about Noah's Ark many years ago when this church I was serving had Vacation Bible School, and the Noah story, much to my horror, was one of the stories we were using Bible school. And most of the books depicted Noah's Ark, you know, the typical thing with the little sort of house thing on the top deck. Yeah, you're all nodding. And the obligatory animals, including the giraffes with their necks sort of sticking up out of the ark. But one of the books surprised me because it had illustrations of some of the more weird and wonderful creatures. You know, hedgehogs, wombats, bandicoots, and sloths, and many other animals that I had not even heard of. Like the quokka, or if you have your phone still out, there's the pink fairy armadillo, okay, and a pangolin. You've probably seen that one before too. All of those animals, the huge diversity of life, made me rethink the story, actually. The ark and the point of the story is bigger and much more inclusive and more complex than I realized. This is the theology behind the story. An insight that I've never considered before, because what happens next in the story is really rather astonishing. The floodwaters recede. Noah and his family and all of those animals are so relieved to find themselves alive and on dry land again that Noah leads them all in worship to God. They give God thanks and praise. And God's response is to paint this huge, enormous rainbow, the biggest and most beautiful rainbow anyone has ever seen. And it goes across the whole sky. And then God speaks. Just like God spoke at creation, God speaks at this moment of new creation. And God says, "This will be a sign of my covenant with you. I will never again let the waters destroy the whole of creation." But here's the point that I picked up on, and that I still find rather amazing. God makes this covenant with all of creation and sets the rainbow as the sign. So that means that Noah's God, the God of Israel, is the God of all humankind, of all life, of all creation. The rainbow is there across the sky, and all of God's children and all of God's creation, all of God's creatures are sheltered in its span. So I like to think that this covenant from God and this beautiful sign that we have shows us or reminds us that God is much bigger, much more inclusive, much more complex than we can even begin to imagine. And now, knowing this story, if we read the rest of the Bible carefully, it does reveal the wide inclusiveness of God's love. There are many, many characters whose stories we hear, whose blessings we understand. And they are a blessing to many others. But many of them are not chosen people. And in this day, in this time, in this place, we know that perhaps we are not the chosen people. But we are a blessing to others. There's Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, a Midianite. There are Tamar and Ruth, both not chosen. One a Canaanite, one a Moabite. And again in the stories we hear about Jesus, we hear of others showing love, demonstrating the love and kindness and hope of God, like the Good Samaritan, like the woman at the well. And there are many others that are woven all through the Bible story. And they are part of the family album that is the Bible. And we are called, we're part of that family album too. We're called together because we are children of God. And we go right back to the first chapters of Genesis. It shouldn't surprise us, but I think maybe it does, that the Hebrew scriptures command us just once to love your neighbor as yourself. Just once in the Hebrew scriptures, the Old Testament. But in no fewer than 36 places are we commanded to love the stranger. This sense of God's covenant being for all of humanity is right there in that Noah story. Know us, know them. It wasn't any easier to grasp that concept then as it is now. We human beings love to divide the world up into them and us, friend and foe, the bad and the good. And my favorite way is the deluded and the wise. The people we love and the people we love to despise. But God doesn't work that way. One covenant, one rainbow, one blessing, big enough for everyone. And so we find ourselves, if we go back to the story and the symbolism of the ark, we find ourselves all in the same boat. And more than ever on this planet Earth, it's increasingly obvious to us that we will sink or swim together. Someone once pointed out that a hole in a boat is a hole in the whole boat. And there are many things making tiny and huge holes in the boat. Ethnic tensions, religious conflicts, disparities between rich and poor, the use of religion to justify terrorism and war and division. And you can add to this list, I know that you know. In this world of fear and suspicion and violence, God calls us to be signs of peace and agents of reconciliation. And I know it's not easy, right? But I firmly believe that we are people of faith and we have a special commission and calling to lead the world in embracing diversity. I believe that we are to bear witness to the fact that we are all created in the image of God. All of us, every single person, all created in God's image. And that makes us, in fact, brothers and sisters. It doesn't mean that we aren't different in lots of ways, and it doesn't mean that we have to abandon some of the things we hold dear. But understanding and respect begin when we reach and see beyond our differences. God's promise of new life extends to absolutely everyone, all the people of the earth. This is the gift and blessing of God's ark of multicolored bands. The great rainbow covenant binding us all with its bright glory. This ark that points us towards a vision of God's holy and heavenly realm. Something that's possible right here on earth. We're all included, nobody's left out. The realm of God, where the lost and last and least are blessed as found and first and most. Let us work and pray to bring God's realm to life among us now. Amen.